Part 1, English version, 1,000 words. It started with a question that seemed ordinary, almost casual. David, my son, smiled at me across the kitchen table, a hint of pride in his eyes. Did you see the notice? We listed your house, Mom. I froze. My hands hovered above the teacup I'd been holding, feeling suddenly heavy. Listed my house. The place I had built my life in. The walls that knew every tear, every laughter, every birthday party and holiday gathering. Listed. Without my knowledge. Without my consent. Victoria, his wife, stood behind him, perfect as always. Blonde hair immaculately styled, cream-colored coat pressed neatly, a faint smile that didn't quite reach her calculating eyes. She had that look, the one that said she was in charge, and I was merely a spectator. For a moment, my mind blanked. The house was mine. I had raised David here, wiped his tears when he scraped his knees, and celebrated countless milestones with family and friends. And now, it seemed, it was just another asset in their eyes, a pawn in their carefully planned lives. I took a slow breath, trying to steady my racing heart. We listed it. My voice came out quieter than I intended. David's grin widened, as if the situation were a playful joke, not a betrayal that cut deeper than I expected. I thought it was the right time, Mom, he said, carefully choosing each word, as if weighing my reaction. The market is good, and we can, manage finances better. Manage finances? My jaw tightened. They had managed finances, all right, by excluding me entirely, by pretending that I was not the rightful owner of my own home. My eyes wandered around the kitchen, the room where I had prepared countless family dinners, where the smell of my homemade pies had filled the air every Thanksgiving. Everything familiar now felt foreign, as if the memories themselves were being stolen. I forced a smile, my voice steady even though my chest ached. I see. And I wasn't informed. David hesitated. That slight pause was all I needed to know the truth. It had been deliberate. The secrecy, the glances exchanged with Victoria, the careful wording. They had counted on my trust, my calm nature, my tendency to stay in the background. They had assumed I would remain compliant, silent. I looked at the dining room, at the polished oak table that had hosted so many milestones, so many conversations, so many tears and laughter. And I realized, sharply, that life doesn't always treat you fairly. Sometimes, those you love the most are capable of cold calculation, even betrayal. For a few minutes, I let the room speak for itself. I remembered the afternoons when David was a boy, sitting on my lap while I read him stories of heroes and impossible adventures. I remembered the years I had devoted to keeping the house beautiful, to making it a home. And I felt a surge of something I hadn't felt in years, clarity, a quiet but unwavering strength. I needed to respond, but not with anger. Not yet. I would observe, gather, understand. Rage, after all, is for those who act without thinking. Strategy is for those who know their value. I set the tea down, my fingers brushing the delicate china I had collected over decades, and looked David and Victoria squarely in the eyes. I want to see the documents, I said softly. All of them. Victoria's smile faltered ever so slightly. David's confident posture wavered. They had expected compliance. They had expected me to nod, to accept their actions without question. And now, the game had changed. I remembered the long winters, the quiet nights where I had whispered bedtime prayers for him, the days I had gone without to ensure he had everything he needed. And I realized I was not powerless. Not yet. And perhaps not ever. The house was more than wood and stone. It was memory, legacy, and identity. And I would not relinquish it without asserting every right I had, without reminding them that I had built this life before they stepped in with their calculated smiles. I took a sip of tea, the warm liquid steadying me. I would fight quietly, strategically. I would reclaim not only the house, but also my dignity. And they would learn, sooner rather than later, that I was not a figure to be overlooked or underestimated. I let them sit there, waiting for my reaction. I said nothing further, and in the silence, I felt the power of patience and determination. I knew that this was just the beginning, but for the first time in weeks, I felt a spark of control, a glimmer of hope that the scales of fairness might tip back, if only slightly, in my favor. Part 2, English version, 1,000 words. The next few days felt like walking through a fog. The house, which had once been a sanctuary, now seemed to hum with quiet tension. I moved slowly through the rooms, noting the subtle changes that had taken place while I was distracted by life, by my modest routines. David and Victoria had always been careful, almost surgical, about the ways they inserted themselves into decisions, slipping in a little here, a little there, never enough for me to notice until the result was undeniable. I thought back to the past year, the small, almost imperceptible shifts. David insisting on managing the household bills himself, claiming he wanted to help me handle things. Victoria commenting on the furniture I had chosen decades ago, calling it quaint, in that polite, almost patronizing tone that always made my stomach tighten. The nights I had stayed up, folding laundry and cleaning, only to have them suggest rearranging rooms for efficiency. The sense of intrusion had always been subtle, almost loving on the surface, but now I could see the careful architecture of control. Every creaking floorboard, every familiar scent of the kitchen, every ray of sunlight slipping through the windows seemed sharper, more pointed. This was my life, and it was being rewritten in silence. I could feel it in the way the mail sat unopened for days, how the bills I had once meticulously filed were now sorted by someone else. I wasn't invisible, not entirely, but I was being treated as though I were fading into irrelevance. That evening, I sat at the dining table alone, staring at the place where David would usually sit. My tea had grown lukewarm, the steam curling slowly into the air as if mocking me with its sluggishness. I picked up the pen I had been using to balance my checkbook and traced invisible lines across the page. The numbers didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that I felt entirely excluded from decisions I had every right to be part of. I remembered the times I had risen before the sun to make breakfast for a household that sometimes seemed indifferent, the nights I had waited up to make sure David got home safely from work. All those years spent in devotion now felt like currency I had unwittingly spent, only to discover the transaction was not what I expected. They had been building something around me without me, a structure that depended on me remaining silent, compliant, and unquestioning. I took a deep breath and let it out slowly, trying to quell the surge of panic that threatened to rise. There was no point in hysteria. That was the mistake they expected me to make. I had always been calm, always collected. And now, my calm was a weapon. I could let them believe I was intimidated, that I would back down. I could let them think the house was theirs to claim without a fight. And then, quietly, I would reclaim it. For the next 2 days, I watched and listened more than I spoke. Victoria would arrive at my door with carefully chosen gifts, ostensibly friendly, but always with a trace of calculated charm. She would smile and ask questions about my health, my hobbies, my routines, all with the faintest edge, the faintest expectation that I would respond with gratitude or deference. I didn't. I simply smiled politely, thanked her, and turned my attention back to my own tasks. David, meanwhile, assumed the role of the dutiful son, answering questions as if he had not orchestrated the entire scenario. He would speak of financial planning and investment strategies, while carefully avoiding the words that mattered most: the house, the deed, my rights. He assumed that I would be overwhelmed by the complexity, that the very idea of challenging their authority would be too exhausting for someone my age. And yet, as I moved quietly through the living room, I realized something crucial. The house had not yet left my hands. The walls were mine. The memories were mine. The authority I had invested in this home for decades was still mine if I chose to assert it. They had made assumptions about my resignation, but they had underestimated my patience, my meticulous attention to detail, and my refusal to act impulsively. That night, I sat in the study, old leather chair creaking beneath me, and went through every document, every letter, every financial record I had kept. I traced the lines of ownership, the signatures, the dates. My hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of the realization that the battle would be fought not with anger, but with knowledge. Knowledge, and the quiet assertion of authority. By the third day, I had formed a plan. I would confront them, but not with a raised voice. I would speak calmly, clearly, and with evidence. I would demonstrate that the house was not theirs to take lightly, that I had the right and the wisdom to decide its fate. I would show them, without theatrics or tantrums, that underestimating me was a mistake that would cost them more than they anticipated. And so, the house remained quiet, its walls bearing witness to my thoughts, my calculations, my resolve. For the first time in weeks, I felt a small but tangible sense of control, a glimmer of hope that the scales of fairness could be nudged back in my favor. They believed the silence was weakness. They did not yet know it was the calm before a storm. Part 3, English version, 800 words. By the fourth morning after David's revelation, I decided it was time to confront the situation head-on. I had spent hours reviewing every document, memorizing every clause, every signature. Knowledge had become my shield, my quiet weapon against their assumptions of my weakness. I invited David and Victoria to the study, the room where I had once guided him through homework, where laughter and scolding had intermingled, shaping him into the man before me. The irony wasn't lost on me. The very place of my nurturing would now be the site of confrontation. David, I began, my voice steady, controlled. I need to talk about the house. Specifically, the listing. I want to understand why I wasn't informed. David's eyes darted toward Victoria, who looked uncharacteristically uncertain. Mom, we thought it was the best choice. The market is strong, and it seemed practical, he said, carefully avoiding my gaze. Practical. That word echoed hollowly in the room. Practical for whom? Certainly not for me. My hands rested lightly on the polished desk, a grounding gesture that reminded me of my purpose. I was calm, yet every inch of my being was alert, measuring every inflection, every hesitation. Let me be clear, I said. I am aware of the documents, the transfers, everything. You may have assumed I wouldn't notice or that I would comply silently. That was your first mistake. Victoria opened her mouth, but no words came. The smile that had always been a shield, a veil for manipulation, now seemed strained. David's shoulders stiffened, his carefully constructed calm beginning to crumble. I leaned forward slightly, my voice soft but firm. This house is more than bricks and mortar. It is memory. It is life. It is the place where I built a family, and it will not be taken from me without my say. The room was silent except for the faint ticking of the clock and the subtle creak of the chair beneath David. I had anticipated resistance, perhaps deflection or negotiation, but I had also prepared for every possible scenario. Calm, knowledge, patience, these were my allies. David shifted uncomfortably. Mom, I didn't think you would. You didn't think I would notice. I finished for him, my eyes locking onto his. You underestimated me. That is a serious error. The weight of years, of accumulated experience, settled around me like armor. Every quiet evening I had spent balancing accounts, every careful step I had taken to maintain this home, every lesson of prudence and restraint now lent me authority. They had assumed that age meant passivity. I was about to prove them wrong. I want the listing paused, I said. Until we have a full discussion and review, it remains inactive. You will not proceed without my consent. A subtle shift passed between them. David's gaze dropped. Victoria's lips tightened. They had expected hesitation, perhaps even tears, but I gave neither. I was calm, deliberate, and firm, a presence that could not be ignored. For the first time, I saw the realization dawn in their eyes. They had miscalculated. Their strategy had relied on my silence and compliance, but they had overlooked the one thing they could not control, my determination. The confrontation ended without drama, without shouting. Yet, the balance had shifted. I had asserted control, not through force, but through clarity and resolve. They understood, in that quiet moment, that the house, and the respect I commanded, would not be surrendered lightly. I sat back in my chair, letting the room absorb the stillness. The air was heavy with tension, but beneath it lay something else, acknowledgement. They had recognized that the mother they thought would yield easily was neither naive nor powerless. I had regained the first measure of authority, and it was only the beginning. Part 4, English version, 800 words. The days following the confrontation felt tense, but I could sense a subtle shift. The quiet power of knowledge and calm had unsettled David and Victoria more than any argument could. They moved carefully, choosing words that measured and weighed each reaction I might have. But I had already anticipated that. They had underestimated the patience of someone who had built her life on foresight. I spent mornings walking through the house, inspecting the small corners where my memories were most alive. Every photograph, every framed certificate, every memento I had kept over decades told a story. And now, they were weapons in my own arsenal. I could prove, with details, with dates, with records, that the house was not simply a building. It was the repository of a life I had devoted to family. I contacted the real estate agent. My tone was calm, precise. I am the owner of record. The listing must be paused immediately. No further action can occur without my express authorization. There was a pause on the other end of the line, a hesitation that spoke volumes. I heard the faint exhale of someone realizing that they had misjudged me. I turned my attention to David. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't plead. I simply presented the facts. The bank statements, the deed, the correspondence, all carefully organized. He could see my attention to detail, the clarity of my intentions. I had been underestimated, yes, but I was not ignorant. Victoria attempted to interject, a rehearsed smile playing on her lips. We just wanted to help, make things smoother for you, Mom. I looked at her steadily, letting the room speak for itself. Help? By taking decisions out of my hands? By assuming I would not notice, that I would not act? That is not help. That is assumption, and assumptions can be corrected. I saw the flicker of doubt in their eyes. For weeks, they had assumed that my age meant weakness, that my quiet nature meant compliance. But patience, I reminded myself, is a different kind of strength. One that waits, observes, and strikes not with force, but with inevitability. By the end of the week, the listing was officially paused. The house remained under my control, not because of confrontation, but because of the steady assertion of authority. David and Victoria realized that attempts to manipulate, to control, or to marginalize me would not succeed. Their confidence had been shaken, and the silence in the house now carried a new weight, a respect, unspoken but tangible. I spent the evenings reflecting, moving through the rooms as dusk painted long shadows across the walls. I allowed myself small pleasures, sitting in my favorite armchair by the window, watching the wind ripple through the trees, listening to the faint hum of life outside. The house was alive with my presence, my history. No one could take that from me. This experience taught me a quiet but invaluable lesson. Power is not always loud. It is measured, strategic, and deeply rooted in self-respect. I did not need to argue, to yell, or to plead. I only needed to act with clarity and patience, to show that the foundation of my life, both literal and figurative, was not up for negotiation. David and Victoria had underestimated the strength of the woman they thought would quietly accept their plans. They had forgotten that experience and wisdom often outweigh youth and ambition, especially when wielded with patience. I had reclaimed my house, yes, but more importantly, I had reclaimed the respect and acknowledgement that had been temporarily denied to me. As I closed the study door behind me, I felt a sense of peace that had been absent for weeks. The battle was not over. There would be other challenges, other subtle tests, but I had proven to myself, and to them, that I was neither powerless nor passive. I was ready for whatever came next, armed not with anger, but with resolve and the quiet authority of a life fully lived. Part 5, English version, 800 words. The house finally felt like mine again, not in a legal sense alone, but in spirit. Walking through the hallways, I traced my fingers along the familiar banisters and walls. The faint scent of lavender lingered from the cleaning solutions I always favored. Each photograph on the mantel, each framed certificate, every small token of memories seemed to whisper reassurance. This is where my life had unfolded, and it remained mine. David and Victoria were quieter now, more deliberate in their steps. I could see the tension in David's shoulders, the way he avoided looking directly at me during family calls. Victoria's practiced smile was still there, but it was strained, lacking the confident ease she had once carried. They had learned, perhaps reluctantly, that I was not to be underestimated. In the evenings, I allowed myself to linger in moments that once felt ordinary, realized that authority, once quietly claimed, resonates outward, affecting not just those directly involved, but the environment itself. I reflected on what had happened, on the weeks of uncertainty and quiet tension. The betrayal had been sharp, unexpected, and deeply personal. Yet, in facing it, I had discovered a strength I hadn't fully recognized, an ability to act decisively, strategically, without losing my composure. This strength was my own, independent of David or Victoria, and it was deeply rooted in my experience and self-respect. At night, I would sit in the study, the familiar creak of the leather chair beneath me, the lamp casting a warm glow over the papers and photographs I cherished. I no longer feared the uncertainty of their actions. I had reclaimed my home, yes, but more importantly, I had reclaimed a sense of self that could not be taken, borrowed, or questioned. I understood now that family dynamics are complicated, layered with love, expectation, and sometimes betrayal. But wisdom comes with age, and clarity comes with patience. I no longer needed to assert loudly, to shout, or to plead. I acted with the quiet authority of someone who knows her value and refuses to surrender it. And as I finally settled into the quiet of the evening, a sense of peace enveloped me. I had navigated the storm with calm, with precision, and with dignity. David and Victoria had learned an important lesson about underestimating the strength of the woman who raised their son. The house remained, and I remained, grounded in the life I had created and the respect I had quietly demanded. Part 6, English version, 800 words. The tension that had been thick in the house slowly began to lift, replaced by a cautious equilibrium. Past, the house regained its rhythm. Meals were quieter, yes, but not uncomfortable. Conversations resumed, punctuated by the unspoken understanding that I was present, aware, and in control. I took small victories as evidence of the shift. David no longer made unilateral decisions about the home. Victoria paused before offering unsolicited advice, and the atmosphere, once heavy with tension, became lighter, tempered with cautious respect. I found myself reflecting on the nature of family, the fragility of trust, and the enduring strength of experience. Betrayal had been painful, but it had also illuminated my own capacity for resilience. I understood now that the quiet, methodical assertion of authority often speaks louder than confrontation, and that respect, once earned, cannot easily be stripped away. Evenings were my sanctuary. I would sit by the window with a cup of tea, letting the soft light filter through the curtains, casting shadows across the familiar furniture. Part 7, English version, 800 words. Weeks passed, and the subtle tension in the house gradually shifted toward a cautious normalcy. David and Victoria moved carefully around me, their voices polite, their movements measured. It was a different kind of respect now, one earned not through confrontation but through the quiet assertion of authority. They had tested the waters, and they had learned the depth of my resolve. I spent the mornings revisiting routines I had neglected in the months of uncertainty. Breakfasts prepared with care, the garden tended meticulously, and the small rituals of my home brought a sense of grounded stability. Each familiar gesture reinforced the reality that this was my space, my life, and my decisions were sovereign. The house was alive with my presence, and it radiated a calm strength that could not be ignored. There were moments, of course, when the past week's events replayed in my mind. I could recall the cold, measured words from David, the rehearsed smiles of Victoria, the subtle manipulations and assumptions that had been made. And yet, rather than anger, I felt a quiet satisfaction. I had navigated the storm without raising my voice, without anger or theatrics. My patience and foresight had shifted the balance of power back to where it belonged. One afternoon, as the sunlight streamed through the living room windows, I called David to sit with me. I had organized a folder with all of the key documents and notes I had prepared. "David," I said calmly, "I want us to establish a new understanding. The house is not just property, it's a legacy. Every decision regarding it requires respect, discussion, and transparency." He looked at me, hesitant, yet something had changed in his eyes. The arrogance he had carried for so long had been replaced with a tentative awareness. He nodded slowly, realizing that the days of unilateral decisions were over. Victoria, standing just beyond, seemed to shrink into the background, the confidence that once radiated from her diminishing in the presence of steady authority. I reflected on what had changed. It was not just about legal papers or ownership, it was about recognition. They had finally seen me as I was, a woman of intellect, patience, and resolve. A woman who, despite age and perceived vulnerability, commanded respect through presence, clarity, and quiet decisiveness. In the evenings, I allowed myself to indulge in small pleasures that I had once overlooked. Reading in the study, sipping tea by the window, listening to the faint sounds of the neighborhood. These routines, mundane on the surface, were powerful reminders of my autonomy. Each action was a reclaiming of space and self, a testament to the strength built over decades of careful living. As the weeks unfolded, I noticed subtle changes in the household. David consulted me before making decisions, sometimes even seeking advice for matters large and small. Victoria spoke less, her comments measured and respectful. The previous atmosphere of tension and uncertainty had shifted to a cautious, balanced rhythm. My influence was quiet, yet undeniable. I realized that the experience had reinforced something essential. Patience and quiet strength often achieve what confrontation cannot. By maintaining composure and focusing on strategy rather than reaction, I had not only preserved my home, but also reinforced my authority and self-respect. The lessons of the past weeks were etched deeply. Betrayal could be faced without hysteria, and respect could be reclaimed without hostility. Sitting in the study one evening, looking over photographs of David as a child, I allowed myself a small smile. The house was safe, my role acknowledged, and my presence felt. I understood that family, with all its complexities, could present challenges, but resilience, foresight, and quiet determination could navigate them. I was not just surviving. I was thriving, rooted in my experience, my knowledge, and the enduring strength of my choices. And as the sun set, painting golden light across the familiar furniture and walls, I felt a profound sense of accomplishment. I had restored not only my home but the balance within my family, a subtle yet powerful affirmation that age and experience are forces that command recognition. I was ready for whatever came next, confident that my presence, wisdom, and resolve could face any challenge without fear or compromise. Part 8. English version, 800 words. By the time the following week arrived, the house felt stable again, though not without its reminders. Every creak of the floorboards, every echo of laughter or conversation, seemed charged with the quiet awareness that the balance had shifted. David and Victoria were cautious, no longer assuming I would remain passive. Their careful movements and deliberate words reinforced a new reality. My presence was not just acknowledged, it was respected. I spent mornings in the kitchen, preparing breakfast as I had done for decades, but now with a sense of reclamation. Each plate arranged, each cup of tea poured, was a quiet affirmation of control, a ritual that reminded me I still owned not only the house, but my own agency. Victoria would enter, attempting conversation, her voice softer, cautious. I responded politely, measured, maintaining boundaries without creating tension. The afternoons were for the garden. I would prune the roses, water the shrubs, and sweep the pathways, letting the rhythm of labor ground me. The scent of soil and fresh blooms was a tangible reminder that life continues, even after betrayal, and that it is possible to restore order and serenity through one's own efforts. Each task was a meditation, a reclaiming of both space and mind. Sometimes, I would call David into the study to discuss household matters or finances. These conversations were calm, professional, and deliberate. I had learned to speak with authority without confrontation, to assert my decisions without demanding submission. He began to understand, gradually, that my knowledge and composure were not weaknesses to be exploited but strengths to be respected. Victoria, too, adjusted her behavior. Her comments became less frequent, her advice less intrusive. She had realized, perhaps reluctantly, that my guidance could not be ignored, and that any attempt to sideline me would be met with quiet but unwavering resistance. The shift in dynamics was subtle yet unmistakable. One evening, as I settled into my favorite chair with a cup of tea, I reflected on the transformation. The house, once a site of tension and uncertainty, had regained its rhythm. It was not merely a home. It was a symbol of patience, perseverance, and the quiet assertion of authority. I understood that power is often silent, cumulative, and rooted in knowledge and foresight rather than noise and force. David and Victoria had been forced to confront their assumptions about age, compliance, and strength. They had learned, slowly and perhaps painfully, that patience and composure can alter the course of events more profoundly than confrontation or anger. They now approached me with awareness, the unspoken acknowledgement that I was no longer a passive participant in the life we shared under this roof. I realized, too, that the real work was not in documents or deeds, but in restoring respect and balance. Every measured step, every deliberate act, every calm conversation reinforced the new order. I had reclaimed my home, yes, but more importantly, I had reclaimed the dignity, authority, and agency that had been temporarily challenged. Evenings became my sanctuary. I would sit by the window, watch the sunset illuminate the garden, and allow the calm to settle into my bones. The house had survived the storm of ambition and assumption, and so had I. I was grounded, confident, and prepared for the subtle challenges that might arise in the future. In quiet reflection, I understood that family is complex and loyalty can be tested in unexpected ways. But I had learned that strength is not always loud. Sometimes it is the silent, deliberate assertion of boundaries, the steady insistence on respect, and the patient observation of those around you. It is knowing when to speak, when to act, and when to wait. As the night deepened and the house fell into stillness, I felt a profound sense of calm. I had endured betrayal, navigated uncertainty, and emerged with control intact. My home was mine, my authority restored, and my dignity unshaken. I knew that whatever came next, I had the wisdom, patience, and strength to meet it with composure and clarity. Part 9, English version, 800 words. The days grew quieter, and the house settled into a rhythm that was almost serene. Yet beneath the calm, I remained vigilant. Respect and authority, once questioned, must be continuously observed and maintained. David and Victoria were learning, slowly, that I was not to be dismissed. Every glance, every word, every gesture from them now carried weight because they understood the consequences of underestimating me. I found myself reflecting on the journey, the moments of doubt, betrayal, and subtle manipulation. I had been challenged in ways I never expected, but each challenge reinforced a fundamental truth. My voice, my experience, and my resolve were invaluable. They had assumed age equaled passivity, that quiet compliance meant weakness. How wrong they had been. Afternoons were spent in my study, reviewing correspondence, organizing documents, and planning the next steps to ensure the house remained secure. It was not about confrontation. It was about preparation and awareness. Each letter I wrote, each note I took, reminded me that vigilance is a form of self-respect. The house was my life's work, and I intended to protect it at every turn. Occasionally, David would approach me cautiously, asking for guidance on minor decisions. I answered with calm clarity, careful not to chastise, but to inform. Each interaction was a subtle negotiation of power. He was learning that the mother he thought compliant was actually deliberate, patient, and wise. Victoria observed, silent but attentive, her confidence now tempered by the reality of my influence. Evenings became a sanctuary for reflection. I would sit by the window, a cup of tea warming my hands, and watch the neighborhood settle into twilight. The house felt alive with memory and quiet strength. Every creaking floorboard, every familiar scent, and every beam of light that fell across the room reminded me of the life I had built and the respect I now commanded. The lessons of the past months were etched into every decision I made. Patience is not passivity. Observation is not weakness. Authority can be asserted quietly, firmly, without theatrics. And respect, once earned, through consistency, knowledge, and composure, is enduring. David and Victoria had discovered this through experience, and their acknowledgement, even if unspoken, affirmed my triumph. I found satisfaction in small routines, preparing meals, tending the garden, organizing my study. Each act was a reaffirmation of my presence and my agency. I had reclaimed more than a house. I had reclaimed a sense of self that had been momentarily challenged. Every morning, I reminded myself that my life, my choices, and my dignity were mine to protect. And as night fell, the house quiet and safe, I understood something profound. True strength is measured not by the volume of one's voice, but by the clarity of one's actions, the steadiness of one's resolve, and the wisdom to act with patience and foresight. I had faced betrayal, uncertainty, and subtle manipulation, and emerged stronger, more aware, and fully present in the home I had created. The journey was ongoing, as family dynamics rarely remain static. But I was prepared. I had the patience to observe, the clarity to act, and the knowledge that my experience and composure were forces that commanded respect. The house remained mine, not only as a physical space, but as a symbol of resilience, wisdom, and dignity. And in that quiet realization, I felt a sense of peace that I had not known for years. Part 10, English version, 800 words. The weeks that followed brought a deeper awareness to the household. David and Victoria had adjusted, but now there was a subtle curiosity in their eyes, a recognition that I was not only present but actively shaping the atmosphere. They moved with caution, speaking with deliberation, aware that my decisions and observations carried weight beyond what they had anticipated. I spent mornings revisiting old habits and pleasures I had once set aside. The kitchen became my domain again, each breakfast prepared with care, each tea poured with precision. These small acts were not mere routines. They were a reclaiming of control, a quiet assertion that I was the steward of my home and my life. Victoria would sometimes hover at the doorway, offering suggestions, yet I answered calmly, maintaining boundaries while allowing civility to remain intact. Afternoons in the garden became a meditation. I pruned the roses, swept the paths, and felt the wind in the trees, grounding me in the present. The house responded to my energy. The walls seemed warmer, the air lighter, as if they too recognized the restoration of balance. Even the sun felt different, casting longer shadows across familiar furniture, reminding me that light and calm could coexist with vigilance. I realized that my role had changed. I was no longer simply the observer or the quietly obedient matriarch. I was a participant with influence, guiding, shaping, and asserting without aggression. David's questions became thoughtful, deliberate. He sought input before making decisions that once would have been unilateral. Victoria listened more than she spoke, careful not to overstep the boundaries I had silently established. Each evening, I would sit by the window, reflecting on the dynamics within these walls. The house was no longer a source of tension, but a sanctuary of awareness and deliberate authority. I found satisfaction in the knowledge that the quiet assertion of power could alter relationships, restore respect, and protect both property and self-respect. Sometimes, I recalled the moments that had brought me to this point, the casual announcement that my house was listed, the rehearsed smiles, the subtle manipulations. Each memory was a reminder of how easily trust can be tested and how essential it is to meet such challenges with foresight, calm, and strategy. I had learned that anger alone solves nothing, but measured action, combined with patience, can restore balance and dignity. As night fell, the house was quiet, and I allowed myself moments of reflection. I thought of all the holidays celebrated here, the countless mornings and evenings spent in care and preparation, and the ways I had built a life around family and love. That history was mine. The house was mine, and the authority I now exercised was not taken lightly. It was earned through patience, vigilance, and thoughtful action. I understood, too, that family relationships are complex, often shifting subtly over time. Respect and acknowledgement must be reinforced, boundaries maintained, and patience applied. Each interaction was a chance to reinforce the quiet but firm assertion of self, to model the strength and wisdom that age brings. I had found not just a home, but a framework for navigating life with composure and insight. In the weeks that followed, the balance of power was quietly but firmly restored. I was no longer vulnerable to assumptions or manipulations. David and Victoria respected that I had an active role, and they adapted their behavior accordingly. The house remained a haven, a repository of memories and authority, and I, sitting in my favorite chair with a cup of tea, felt an enduring sense of control and peace. I knew challenges would continue to arise. Family dynamics never remained static, but I had learned to navigate uncertainty with calm, strategy, and foresight. I had reclaimed my home, affirmed my role, and secured my dignity. In doing so, I also discovered a deeper truth. The power to protect and assert oneself often comes not from force or confrontation, but from patience, clarity, and the quiet confidence of a life fully lived. Part 11, English version, 800 words. The house had settled into a new rhythm, one defined by respect and mutual awareness rather than fear or tension. David and Victoria no longer assumed control. Instead, they approached me cautiously, with an unspoken recognition of the authority I had quietly reclaimed. Every decision they made now reflected the understanding that I was fully present, aware, and capable of guiding the household with deliberate calm. I spent mornings immersed in my familiar routines, the rituals that had always grounded me. Breakfasts were prepared with care, flowers in the garden tended with precision, and every detail of the household reflected a subtle but firm control. These were acts of reclamation, small demonstrations that I was not only the owner of the house, but also the orchestrator of its life and energy. Occasionally, I called David into the study to review household matters. We discussed finances, plans for upcoming repairs, and the organization of important documents. These conversations were calm, structured, and intentional. I noticed a shift in his approach. He listened more, thought before speaking, and understood that his mother was not merely present but influential. Victoria observed quietly from the background, aware that any misstep could result in my careful but firm intervention. The past months had taught me the importance of subtlety. Authority does not always need to be loud or forceful. It can be expressed in measured action, deliberate observation, and consistent decision-making. I had learned to assert my will without confrontation, and each day reinforced the quiet power that comes from experience, patience, and self-respect. Evenings became a sanctuary of reflection. I would sit by the window with a cup of tea, letting the fading light wash over the familiar furniture, the photographs of David as a child, and the spaces that held decades of memories. The house was no longer a battleground. It was a testament to resilience, strategy, and the calm assertion of control. I had reclaimed not only the physical space but the respect and acknowledgement that had been temporarily denied. I allowed myself small indulgences, reading, tending to indoor plants, and taking long walks around the property. These activities were not mere leisure. They were exercises in mindfulness and reinforcement of my autonomy. Every step I took, every decision I made, reminded me of the authority I had earned and the dignity that could not be challenged by assumption or arrogance. David and Victoria gradually adapted. He sought advice before acting, often pausing to consider my guidance. Victoria spoke less frequently, her confidence tempered by the realization that I would notice any overstep. The dynamics of the household had shifted quietly but irreversibly. I was no longer a passive participant, but an active presence whose choices and opinions mattered. I reflected on the lessons learned. Patience and observation can be more powerful than confrontation. Calm, measured authority often achieves what force cannot, and the respect of others must be maintained through consistency and clear boundaries. The betrayal I had experienced was painful, but it had revealed my own capacity for resilience, clarity, and strategic thinking. As the nights grew darker and the household fell into silence, I felt a profound sense of satisfaction. I had not only protected my home, but had transformed the relationships within it. I had reinforced my role, established boundaries, and ensured that respect and awareness would continue to shape interactions. My home was secure, my influence recognized, and my dignity intact. In that quiet, I understood something essential. Family is complex, layered with love, loyalty, and occasional betrayal. But wisdom, patience, and the steady assertion of one's presence can navigate these complexities successfully. I had reclaimed not only my property, but my role, my authority, and my peace of mind. And in this realization, I found a deep, lasting contentment. Part 12, English version, 800 words. The weeks turned into months, and the house finally felt fully at peace. The tension that had once hung in every corner had dissipated, replaced by a quiet understanding and respect. David and Victoria had learned, in ways both subtle and profound, that I was not a figure to be underestimated. Their caution and deliberation were evidence of the boundaries I had established, and they now operated within them with care. I spent mornings moving through the house, each room filled with memories, each corner a testament to the life I had built. The scent of fresh flowers, the warmth of the morning sun spilling across the floor, and the familiar creak of the stairs reminded me of the rhythm and stability I had fought to preserve. This was my sanctuary, my legacy, and I had claimed it with calm authority. Occasionally, David would come to me seeking advice, not as a demand but as a request. He had learned to respect my judgment, to appreciate the experience that came with age and care. Victoria had softened too, her interactions tempered with awareness and restraint. It was not perfect, family rarely is, but it was a harmony built on acknowledgement, patience, and mutual understanding. One evening, I sat in the living room, the sunlight fading into golden dusk. I reflected on the journey, the moments of fear, the sting of betrayal, and the subtle manipulations that had once threatened my peace. And I realized something profound: the power to reclaim control, to assert authority, and to maintain dignity does not always come from confrontation. Sometimes it comes quietly, through consistency, patience, and a steadfast commitment to one's own worth. I thought about the life I had created in this house. Each meal prepared, each holiday celebrated, each quiet evening spent in contemplation had been a part of a larger tapestry, a story of devotion, love, and resilience. That story was mine, and I would not allow it to be rewritten by assumption or ambition. The changes in David and Victoria were subtle but undeniable. Decisions were now made with consultation, with consideration for the household as a whole. Suggestions were offered, not imposed. The energy in the house had shifted from one of tension and anticipation to one of calm cooperation. I had created a space where respect was expected and earned, and where my presence mattered. As night fell, I walked through the rooms, feeling the weight of history and memory in every corner. I smiled quietly to myself, knowing that this home was more than walls and a roof. It was a testament to the strength of patience, strategy, and unwavering self-respect. I had defended it, nurtured it, and reclaimed it with the calm confidence of someone who knew her value. In the quiet moments before sleep, I reflected on the lessons learned. Life is full of unexpected challenges, and family dynamics can test even the strongest bonds. But integrity, patience, and awareness can restore balance and command respect. I had faced betrayal, uncertainty, and subtle attempts at control, and emerged not only unscathed but empowered. And so, I closed the day with a sense of peace I had not felt for years. The house was mine, my decisions respected, my dignity intact. David and Victoria had learned the value of acknowledgement and careful consideration, and I, sitting in the quiet of my sanctuary, knew that the calm, deliberate strength I had exercised would carry me through any future challenges. In the end, the house was more than a home. It was a symbol of resilience, wisdom, and the quiet but unyielding authority that comes from living a life of experience and care. I had reclaimed what was mine, and in doing so, had affirmed not only my role within the family but the dignity and respect that age and wisdom command.